Well, we arrived in Lisbon earlier today. We checked into our hotel mid-afternoon. We're staying at the Mara Prime Hotel right downtown, and we actually have a really fun room view. This trip that we're actually on is our first official percussive tours trip since 2019 when we went to Egypt and Jordan with them. But yeah, our friends Jared and Rachel, who you see on the vlog sometimes, they own their own travel agency and they lead group trips. So the four of us went down into the city. We got some dinner, we did some shopping, and now we're getting ready to meet back up with the rest of the group for our first walking tour of the city. Our tour guide met us at the hotel and led us through the streets and past the Santa Justa lift to our first stop at Rocio, a square that has been used as a meeting place for centuries.
So actually this is one of the oldest churches in Lisbon. It's called São Domingos Church or St. Dominic's Church. This is the church that is known to be cursed and blessed at the same time because it has seen 2 earthquakes.
We also got to visit the Alfama district, which is one of Lisbon's oldest neighborhoods. Here, we learned about the history of fado music and stopped at some beautiful viewpoints, or miradouros, that looked out over the sea of red rooftops. The walking tour was a great introduction to the city, which we'd be spending the next 3 days in. So we picked up a lot of useful information about good local restaurants and places we wanted to visit again when we had more time. Tapas time. The tapas and cocktails we got at Navega were delicious, but Vince and I didn't stay out as late as the rest of the group because we had major plans for the next day and we would have to get up early in the morning. Vince and I rented a car this morning and we drove from Lisbon out to the coast. We're at Cabo da Roca and we're going to take a hike northward. We're going to go to Praia da Ursa. We'll probably keep going after that and just see how many beaches we want to go to today. Since it was early morning on a weekday, there weren't many other hikers on the trail when we started out. Hiking along the tops of towering sea cliffs felt a lot like standing on the edge of the world, the blanket of green succulents dropping off into an endless blue chasm. It didn't take long for us to reach what would be the highlight of our hike. This is Praia da Ursa, one of the most famous beaches in this area. A steep trail led down to the beach where we were surprised to find it totally empty. We just hiked down the cliff. We're on Praia da Ursa. There's not really anybody here, which is pretty amazing. Vince and I couldn't believe that we had such a beautiful beach all to ourselves. We explored around the towering sea stacks and watched powerful waves crash onto the sand. The warm, sunny weather made the day even more perfect. We'd been expecting it to be rainy for our entire stay in Portugal, but the sun picked a great day to come out of hiding. We knew Praia da Ursa was going to be the best stop of the day, so we stayed there for a while, and by the time we finally started the hike back up to the cliffside, other visitors were just making it down to the sand. Well, we just made this hike probably much harder than it had to be because we took the same direction up from the beach that we took down. We had to hike up a hill, and then down a hill, and then up another hill, and it turns out there was another way to get up from the beach where we could have cut off like 1.5 hills. Now we're sort of at the top and it looks like the terrain gets a lot more flat from here. We can see the town that we're gonna end up in, but it's pretty far away still, so it's kind of just teasing us off on the horizon. The rest of the hike was full of dizzying clifftop views. We planned to go all the way to the town of Praia das Massas, where we could get something to eat before taking a cab back to our car. There were several more beaches along the way, and we made a quick stop at Praia da Draga, where we bought some cold drinks and met some adorable dogs. These are the first trees we've seen all day. Hey Vince.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew something was bothering you back.
At some point we took a wrong turn and ended up on city streets, but we still made it to Praia das Massas eventually. Well, we finally made it to the end of the hike. It took a little longer than expected because we were stopping to look at so much stuff. We did all the really exciting stops this morning, and then the walk just got easier from there, and now we're in this peaceful coastal town. Vince went for a swim while I tried my best to get photos and videos of the staggering waves that were pummeling the shoreline. And then we grabbed an early dinner at a nearby restaurant. We arrived back in Cabo da Roca just in time to watch the sunset over the Atlantic. This was a first for me since I've only ever visited the Atlantic from the Americas. It's sunset and we're back at Cabo da Roca where we started the day. There's a few more people here now than this morning, and everybody's here to watch the sun go down. This morning we're at the train station and we're about to catch a train to Sintra. Vince and I were out in that direction yesterday on our hike, but today we're going to go into the actual city. We're going to see some castles, some gardens. It's supposed to be really beautiful. This was another highly anticipated day tour for me. Sintra is known for feeling like it was plucked straight from the pages of a fairy tale, and I couldn't wait to explore its enchanting palaces and gardens. We're at Pena Palace. It's very foggy, exactly the opposite of yesterday. Even though the weather's not great, the palace still looks very pretty even in the fog. It's got quite an atmosphere. I hadn't actually planned to bother going inside of Pena Palace because I was more interested in its brightly colored exterior and surrounding gardens. But the fog and bitterly cold wind changed my mind pretty quickly, and I decided to explore the palace's lavish interior with the rest of the percussive group. That's a toilet. It was a different experience than what I was expecting, but it was fun nonetheless. We spent the whole morning there and then went back into the quaint town of Sintra to grab some food before our next stop. We just got a quick lunch, and now we are at a palace and garden called La Quinta Jaquilea. I will learn how to say that at some point. Right now, I don't think I'm saying it right. I am so sorry to any Portuguese speakers out there, but here goes. Quinta da Regaleira. Anyways, the man who made the Quinta da Regaleira what it is today was named Antonio Augusto de Carvalho Monteiro. He hired architect Luigi Manini to help him create his vision for the large estate, and together they designed structures to reflect Monteiro's scientific and philosophical interests. The garden is full of grottos, underground passageways, turrets, and perhaps most famously, the initiatic well. The well was never actually used for collecting water, but rather for ceremonial purposes. While exiting the Regaleira Palace, we noticed that the fog on top of the mountains had lifted enough to give us a view of the Moorish castle on the nearest peak. So we spontaneously decided to try to get there before it closed within the next couple of hours. So we left the Quinta da Regaleira and caught a bus to the top of the mountain just in time to buy entrance tickets to the castle. We weren't exactly sure that we were going to have time to do this last thing today, but we made it. So we've got the big 3 things that you have to do in Sintra all down. We are headed now to the Moorish castle. The Moorish castle was much less crowded than the other attractions in Sintra, and the quietness of the site combined with the dense fog to create an atmosphere of eerie stillness that made the castle feel like it had been frozen in time. Walking along its stone walls, I could easily imagine that I had been transported back in time to the Middle Ages. I love when a place ignites my imagination like that, so the Moorish castle was easily my favorite stop of the day. We're at the top, and it's very windy. We did a bit of souvenir shopping in Sintra on our way back to the train station. We're about to try our first ginger, which is cherry liqueur in a dark chocolate cup. After wandering the streets for a bit, it was time to return to Lisbon, where I had one thing on my mind: food. Pro tip for my fellow vegetarians out there: El Rey Dom Frango in Barrio Alto has some amazing handmade veggie burgers. This is our last day in Portugal, and we're starting the morning in the town of Belém at a cafe called Pastéis de Belém. We're about to have some of the original recipe pastéis de nata, which is an egg pastry that was invented here in Belém in the monastery that we're going to go to right after this. Oh, that's really good. Like, really good. This is the best one.
Yeah. It's so flaky. Look at all those layers.
After breakfast, we went just down the street to visit Geronimo's monastery.
And this is, of course, where the pastéis de nata was invented, like I mentioned before.
The line to get inside was long, but it was because only a certain amount of people are allowed into the monastery at once. So when we finally did get to enter, it was definitely worth the wait, and we were able to look around more comfortably because there was no overcrowding. We also managed to make it inside just before it started raining, so we got to avoid the downpour, and we got to see the monastery's gargoyles in action. Back in Lisbon, Vince, Rachel, Jared, and I went to visit the Carmel convent. The convent was destroyed during the 1755 earthquake, and all that's left standing is the skeleton of the roof. We spent the last of our time in Lisbon wandering the streets and shopping. Rachel and I found a couple of fantastic antique stores, and I was able to buy some escudo, which was Portugal's currency before the euro, so I get to add that to my coin collection now. The next morning, we were back in transit and on our way to Morocco. Today is just a travel day. We left Lisbon early this afternoon and we arrived here in Casablanca, Morocco. We're not staying here. We're on a very short transit tour and we just came downtown to see the King Hassan II Mosque. This is among the biggest mosques in the world and it is the second biggest minaret, second only to a mosque in Makkah, Saudi Arabia. Our first morning in Marrakesh started with a walking tour so we could get our bearings. We saw the Kasbah Mosque, and then we went into the Medina where we got to see a small portion of the souks that Marrakesh is famous for. We attended an argan oil demonstration before the group split up to go on different excursions. Vince and I headed into the desert with some of the other percussive travelers to go on a quad ride.
What's on the menu?
It was actually my first time driving a quad. I've ridden on them plenty of times, but it was definitely more fun to be in the driver's seat. Vince and Kurt kept getting scolded by our guide for doing too many donuts. By the time we stopped for a break in a palm oasis, I was absolutely coated in dust. We drank some water, took advantage of the photo op, and then hopped back on the quads and rode to a little village where we got our first taste of Moroccan mint tea and some delicious snacks. Then it was time to race back to where we'd started because we had another excursion coming up quick. Most of the group got back together for a trip into the desert to have dinner at the Agafe luxury camp. Before our meal, we got to watch the sunset over the Agafe desert with a view of the Atlas Mountains far off in the distance. We had another round of mint tea, and then somebody managed to talk Jared into playing a drum. This has become a bit of a percussive tourist tradition since he named his company after his love of drumming. Dinner was fabulous. We had our first tagines and there were tons of delicious veggie options. Afterwards, there was live music and a campfire, and we got to relax as stars started to appear in the night sky. I was very ready for bed by the time we left the camp, but Vince, Jared, and Richard had other ideas. The next morning, we embarked on a super long bus drive through the Atlas Mountains, stopping at several points of interest along the way. My favorite of these stops was the Tiloe Kasbah, an abandoned kasbah that's crumbling from the outside but still in pristine condition on the inside of its palace. I love the detailed artistry inside of the palace, and its contrast with the ruined exterior made it all the more surprising and special. After leaving Tiloe Kasbah, we drove for a while more before finally making it to the day's main destination. We just took a very long drive through the Atlas Mountains to get here, Ait Ben Adu. It has been around for about 1,000 years. More specifically, the city has been fortified since the 11th century, and its oldest remaining buildings date back to the 17th century. Some of its kasbahs are still inhabited today, and the city is open as a free tourist destination. We climbed all the way up to the top of the hill that stands in the middle of the citadel to get a better view of the city and the surrounding desert. Ait Ben Hadu and neighboring Ouarzazate have been used as filming locations in countless movies, and I could definitely understand why as I gazed over the rose-colored buildings. There were several artists in Ait Ben Hadu that painted scenes of the city and the desert using only saffron, indigo, and green tea. The green tea is invisible when it's painted onto the paper, but turns a rich brown when it's exposed to heat. I really enjoyed getting to see a demonstration of the painting appearing on the page, and I did end up buying one to take home. After Ait Ben Hadu, we only had one stop left on our tour. We're finishing up our day tour in Ouarzazate, which is a major film studio where tons of films have been made. Game of Thrones was filmed here, The Mummy, Lawrence of Arabia. We're about to go into the film museum to learn a little bit about that.
So you're going to see lots of different settings that were used in different movies and films. So you can just walk around. There's 4 different buildings.
I really didn't know what to expect from the Cinema Museum, but it ended up being a lot of fun. We got to roam around and explore sets from lots of different movies. It was pretty funny to see plaster versions of the kinds of places we'd been visiting all week. And we even got to use the sets to practice our own acting skills.
Let me out! Richard! Richard! Richard has that key!
You got a key, Katie.
I don't have a key. Do you have a key?
I'm expecting a call from Hollywood any day now. We also got some time to poke around in some nearby antique stores, and there was just so much to see. After the long ride back to Marrakesh, some of us went into the Medina to get dinner and to enjoy the atmosphere of the market after dark. It was a totally different world than it had been in the daytime. People were gathered into groups listening to music, the air was filled with the spicy smell of incense, and the energy of it was contagious. The next morning was our last one in Morocco, and Vince and I decided to spend the day back in the Medina. It had totally transformed from the centralized gathering of the previous night back into a bustling market filled with beautiful artistry. We did buy a few last-minute items. Thank you. But mostly we just wandered the narrow streets, dodging motorcycles and cobras, and talking to artisans about their crafts. It had been a really amazing trip, and I couldn't believe it was already time to go home. Portugal and Morocco were so different from each other, and both absolutely beautiful. From beaches and castles to mountains and deserts, it felt like we'd seen a little bit of everything in just a week's time. We stopped at Aldi for exactly one reason. When I say I've been waiting 3 years for this, believe me. We haven't been to Europe since 2019, and I've been missing this so much. You put your oranges in the top. You press the button. Oh my gosh. Look at it go. Even Vince likes it. Vince does not care about castles. It's true.
It's